Hey, folks, welcome back to The Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. It is high noon Central Texas time, and I hope you are doing well. We're back, and today we are back with a vengeance. We just had the 1 year anniversary of the launch of the Texan token, and it just happened to be July 4th, Independence Day. And boy, you end up seeing a lot of different information about, um, you know, why did we say to King George, nope? Why did we do this? What was it all about? What was happening? And you know what's amazing about it is these same things are happening once again. There are cycles of life. And folks, we're going to be talking with our guest today, Matt Long. And I've become a huge fan of Matt Long, but we're actually going to be working together here in the future on a new venture, a new channel, a podcast that's going to be weekly called Preserving America in Texas. And so we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about just updates from Matt Long, what he's up to, what he cares about. He's got a gaggle of children. We'll talk about that as well. It's amazing. This is an amazing time in human history, folks. Everything is being reordered. And to think that crypto and all of the things that we're doing in this world are having an impact on a future state. And what I love about this generation that's coming, that's so interconnected, is one in which is very practical and pragmatic because we're in a crisis era. And so what are we going to do to fix this stuff? Well, Matt Long's a guy who has a heart and a desire and an intent to be someone who makes it better, right? Improves things. And so, folks, this is going to be a good one. I want to welcome Magnus and Mobius and Sam Kemp. What's up, man? Hope you had a great trip to the Florida region. David Lee, all the way from Southwest Indiana, and Matt Long, he's here. You're going to hear from him. So thanks for being here. Let's get into it. Folks, welcome back. Yeah, he's back again. He was on one time before. Matt Long, what's going on, buddy?
All right, man. Hey. Excited to be here.
Yeah, this is so great. Well, it was so good to that you came to Gen Con. I was so thankful that you were willing to make the trip. And I know you got a big old family, and I know you're a busy guy, but you took time out. And was that beneficial to you? What was your impression of Gen Con?
Oh man, Gen Con was amazing. I've got a list of like things I took away right here. Danny the singer had to email me my notes because I left my notebook there like an amateur, but he did send them to me. And yeah, almost daily I go through these. A lot of like gems from Steve Staggs, a lot of gems from you. One of my favorite things that you said was, man, thinking about yourself or praying for yourself, that's small thinking. And it's a paraphrase, I believe. It was in one of your talks. But it's just, man, we got to think bigger. We got to think about the future, about future generations. And that's my passion, as you've already touched on.
Yeah, totally. Well, one of the things that you and I agree on is leadership is extremely important, right? And, having leaders who are, if you will, activating or, basically empowering the tools, right? One of the things Steve, said, and he says many times to me, is he says, tools themselves are neutral, and those things are literally utilized by people with intent, right? A gun could sit on the table for here to forever unless it is, activated. And, the spirit in which they are used is really what, mobilizes those tools. And so leadership is really, really important. And obviously, we're in such a weird time when it comes to leadership. I don't know a whole lot of people that I, value or admire who actually want to be in politics, right? It's just like a wood chipper. And, it's certainly attracted an interesting group of leaders. And it's interesting the lessons that we learn from having people who may or may not be animating these tools for good, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you've got two animals, right? You've got the one who has been fascinated with politics his whole life and wants to go into it, and that reminds me of like a Ted Cruz, who I heard his
ambitious.
Dad, yes, yeah, and I heard his father speak. Wow, I don't know if you've ever. Man, his first name escapes me, but his dad is a pastor. He's a phenomenal speaker. I heard him speak at the Parker County Conservative meeting a few months ago, and Rafael Cruz, and oh, just amazing. And he was talking about how Ted Cruz was, reading the classics, all the way back in high school, and obviously, serving student council and things like that. But then you have this other group that feels like they're forced into it, and I think of a Donald Trump type, where they see the platform that they've created through other things, and then someone like me who, with 7 children and more to come, I'm sure, feels like I have a responsibility to leave them with a place that's functioning at the very least, and so that's what's spurred me on to feel like, what can I contribute? What does that look like? Who needs me? And how can I do that?
Yeah, and you and I got connected really, I think, primarily because of your activism, or if you will say, I don't even know if the term is activism, but your kind of political commentary as it relates to, policy and those type of things. Give the audience a background on you and what is basically driving you, because that's what got my attention. Was here's a really sharp guy who really cares about his family and is really, activating himself in this political sphere.
Yeah, so you could go back before COVID a few years, where I realized, maybe everything the government is doing is not for our benefit, right? At least the federal government, at the very least. And so I started to question things that I've just taken for granted, that things that will always be. And one of those things would be the fact that the United States is a country. And if, you've talked about Daniel Miller's book many times, Texit, how the trend for countries to get smaller and more specific and more decentralized is on the uptrend. I think, we've like tripled the number of countries in the world since like the 1950s or something like that.
Yep.
And so I started to wrestle with this idea, like, wow, I've always thought of the United States as something that's going to be here forever. And I started following a guy through my dad by the name of Martin Armstrong.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge Martin Armstrong fan. Huge.
Yeah. So he obviously, he's a big study of cycles, studier of cycles, and he builds these computer models. And he also understands that the federal government is not necessarily here for our safety and protection all the time. And his model had predicted that the United States would break up by the year 2032.
Yep.
And I wrestle with that a bit. And I'm a 5th generation Texan. My children are 6th generation Texans, and I've always loved Texas. And I've lived in other places, lived in Canada, got tired of COVID and communism, came back here, and started really studying Texas history for the first time again. It's kind of like my rebirth as a Christian was when I finally started reading the Bible. I finally started redigging into history and realizing the rich history of brave, courageous men that stood on principle, stood on what was right, and took this land for themselves. And the first, Texas independence, the Republic of Texas. And I just feel like a proactive measure is always better than a reactive measure. And if we take as gospel that the United States is going to have issues, in the near future, well, then it makes sense to do something ahead of that. And I think, especially based on reading Daniel Miller's book, Texas has a lot of assets and it has a lot of things that it can stand strong on, and it can be a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. And I do believe an independent Texas is good for the entire world, not just Texans. Unfortunately, who knows what it leaves behind if it does leave the union. So there's because we're probably taking like a quarter of the conservatives in population with us. So does that hurt the U.S. or does it start something that fuels a fire that at least holds the federal government's feet to the fire, right? If it's a threat. So obviously I'm passionate about Texas politics. And like I said, it's mostly because I have generations underneath me that I want them to experience Texas the same way I experience Texas. I don't want these things to invade us from the outside. These, you can say, liberal woke things that, man, they really, as a conservative Christian, have no business being in the lives of anyone in my family.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that's really interesting at this, time in human history is, you see the things that you've always known to be true, and you see those things deteriorating. And, it gets to a certain point, we've talked offline many times about, what is it really going to take for people to change things? And of course, the founders of America were pretty clear that it's, you're more likely to suffer than change. And so in this incrementalism of things changing, it's like, well, I'm still able to get around. And most people, it takes, true revolution really takes catalysts. And those catalysts generally are things that, put people into the streets. But, 3 years ago now, when I read the book Texit, I told a buddy of mine, I said, this is incredible. Texas could be independent. He says, Texas will never be independent unless the people are in the streets. Well, this was long before we saw the truckers in Canada. This is long before what we saw with the farmers in the Netherlands. And you can just list this out, right? Now you go across the world and unrest is basically what's happening. But still it gets to a point, I think, at least in American society, where, at what point does it get to the point where you said you've had enough? And right now, what I see, and this is really common, is the polarization, in my opinion, is not the answer, right? And so I think there's some critics of, that think that Texas independence is, some sort of conservative thing. And I think it's really important to point out that, why you and I are planning on doing a podcast is the fact that the American idea, right? It is an idea. It's not a landmass, right? The idea of America, not the United States of America, but the idea of America in its core foundational principles, this idea that men could have been kings, but they instead decided that they were going to give away that power in a representational republic. And is it the perfect model? Well, it's been one that has probably produced the most wealth and the most opportunity for people across the world. Why do people want to come here? But it's also, I think, something even bigger. And that is, I think for people who are like you and me and others, is that we're seeing the deterioration of the very bedrock of society. Like what makes a civil society is under attack. I mean, you don't have to look any further than just the nature of what does it look like when we don't have a two-parent home, right? What is the fatherless epidemic in our world creating? And you think you get away from these things that are fundamental to, a child or children being raised. And you see that and you speak about that a lot as it relates to a man with 7 children. How important is that as a topic for you when it comes to, the things that you care deeply about?
Yeah, it's enormous. You mentioned the fact that, what's going to be the catalyst, right? And the catalyst is going to be different for everyone. and you think about the liberals and how they're naturally activists. They're natural activists. Like they're out there pushing stuff, right? And it's a conservative's nature to be conservative, to say, I'm going to step back. I'm going to give them a little space. I'm going to wait and see how dangerous this actually is. But your point about Texas not being conservative versus liberal is true. The majority of both Republicans and Democrats want at least a vote and a talk, a discussion legislatively about what Texas looks like. But mentioning about the importance, like while I'm speaking, it's, to me, the root of all of it is selfishness. The deterioration of our society is selfishness. The reason we could have the United States, the Republic, the idea of America is selfless people, right? These men that, like you said, could have been kings, but they decided to give it back. And I spoke about it at Gen Con, but the opposite, or the enemy of courageousness, is selfishness. Because if you're courageous, you're putting other people's lives before your own. If you're a biblical man, you're supporting your family and you're being a savior to them. You're putting their lives before your own. And that's, and I correlate it to the fact that the opposite of generosity is also selfishness, right? So
Yep.
it's an enemy of all things. And I just feel like selfishness in our society has gone rampant. It is what has led to this deterioration, to where we find ourselves today, where 30 years ago we'd be shocked to see, and by the way, we've gone past the point that our forefathers had enough of in England. We've gone way past that point.
Oh, yeah.
The problem is there's so much selfishness in our society. We don't have that group of men who's ready to stand up and say, no more. I appreciate it, but we're going to take it from here.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons, we even started and we're inspired with this tokenization of the Texas nationalist movement, right? A group of people who want to do things in a legislative, peaceful way, according to the mechanisms that exist for making political change, right? Not violent. And, there needs to be the resourcing for people to be able to affect change. And I think so many people, that they want things to be better. They see a future where, can we preserve these ideals? Because, that's the thing when people talk to me about Texas independence, what they think is that you hate America, right? It's like this one or other. And actually, no, I see it as really the last, option to preserve what is amazing about America, is that this idea, we can't let this idea die. And if you would rely on Washington, you're going to have a problem with that, right? And so the natural benefits of an independent Texas is really about leadership, in my opinion, because, we talk about, how terrible it would be if Texas left the Union. If you think about this, though, a United States is really, this social and economic union where we're agreeing to go together in this. And, obviously we saw with the Civil War over, many different topics. But as you look at leadership in the world, this isn't just a U.S. problem that's happening right now. This is systemic across the world. And I really, truly believe, I use the term, where do good people go? Is there a place where you can go where these ideals, not just biblical ideas, not just conservative ideas, but if you think about the core of a civilized society, the freedom to choose, right? Obviously, law and order, not a two-tiered system, a one that is fair. Those are the things that are being eroded. And it's like, where do good people go? And I think, honestly, we may find ourselves in a time of crisis where Texas becomes independent here in the next, 3 to 5 years. Well, what does that look like? And what does it mean for the world? Because I think a big part of independence movements at this scale, because Texas is the 9th largest economy in the world. Texas does this. It gives permission. But I see crypto fitting into that as a catalyst for it, because without the resourcing, you don't have the ability to affect change. And to think, could we see not only the Texan token, but DeFi, decentralized finance, driving more and more value into individual people's hands who care about these things to say no. Because I really feel like the centralized powers have set up the mechanisms of the purse strings that have locked people in a position. It's created this serfdom. It's created this elite and non-elite classes of people. And these are the things that we reject. And so I think an independent Texas with the right resourcing actually leads the world. And what I mean by leading the world is, what are these fundamental principles that are worth defending? And that's this whole, really the reason you and I are kind of getting together to do this stream and to talk about preserving America and Texas is, what are we actually preserving? We're preserving the core tenets of a civilized society for, our posterity.
Yeah, 100%. I think, we should also remind people that we are not going to be doing the show on this channel. It's going to be on a new channel, and you've got that link below in case, in case someone came on late. The notion of decentralization can be spread across the entire board, can be spread across on a nation scale. It can be spread across, obviously, financially, as we've seen it, to try to get all the power away from these central banks. And to me, the two go hand in hand, because when you're breaking away and you're getting to start this new society, same people, new society, new ways of transacting and doing business, a smart Texas would deliberately decide to be on the cutting edge of free financial transaction, essentially. And when I mean free, I mean power to choose which way you want to transact. And there's really nothing stopping you, but it would be nice for a state to take the lead and say, look, we are going to preserve people's freedom in financial transactions.
Yep.
And it may not be hey, Texas is going to adopt a some kind of digital currency. That would be something, some kind of state sponsored digital currency is not what we'd be looking for. But a state, not sponsor, but maybe, not recommended. What am I trying to think? Approval of, we are excited about the future of digital currency. We want the innovation here in Texas. So we are going to allow you guys to innovate and not step in and get in the way.
Yeah. One of the most powerful things about true decentralized finance in why we tokenize communities is, think about this for a minute. You got El Salvador, and they adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. And what you don't realize is that you're inheriting all of, Bitcoin's, the lodestone that's around the neck of Bitcoin. And it seems like a good idea. What's incredible, though, about restarting things and creating anew is that when you have truly decentralized, currency and the ability for you to engage with an immutable contract, people around the world see what you're doing, and they say, all right, instead of me investing in the governmental authorities or, a specific, government leadership, I'm investing in the people. Because one of the cool things in the tenets of decentralized finance is the fact that you have the ability to choose or not. You have the ability to leverage, these tools of finance, like things like CDs or endowments, or you have the ability to do that outside of a government program. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about programmable money. But, if you think about, how does this actually happen? What are the practical things? Well, in order for the people of Texas to vote, it needs to be a referendum on the ballot. And there's a number of things that are happening currently in Texas that give people the opportunity to say, this is what we want. But, the folks in Austin are as bad as they are in DC to protect the status quo, because, that's the thing. And why I'm so interested in you specifically, Matt, is I see in you someone who is principled, but your desire isn't, to say, hey, this is my career. I did poli-sci in college, and I'm just going to go be a politician because that's my line of work. Returning this to real civil service, to say, no, I have a job. I'm going to sacrifice this amount of time. I'm going to serve, and then I'm going to go back to my farm. I'm going to go back to my business. And, those are the kind of things. I don't know if you're familiar with the Liberty Amendments that was written by Mark Levin. But when you start looking at those things, you say, this thing's got out of control. And what do you do when your computer's running slowly? What are you doing when the router's not working? You reboot the system. And to me, that concept of rebooting is such a Texas thing, right? A boot to your beep, right? It's like this idea, we need to reboot the system. And when you reboot this, what are you doing? And I think this is really important. And Daniel Miller is inspiring to me in this way. You cannot dictate policy in independence. And I thought about that because there's things I care about. I think you and I agree on. But one of the things is, what do people want? People want to be left alone, right? They want opportunities. They want safety and security. They want to be able to choose. They don't want to be harmed. But when you have something like that, this engagement with people that might not agree on certain things, that's the beauty of freedom, right? Is that we protect those things that are protected rights for all because they are self-evident. And that's the thing I think is really important in this process, is that we find candidates who actually would support a referendum, but two, that understand that this isn't just so your side wins. Texas independence isn't about like red states winning. Texas independence is actually about preserving the ideals that are good for all people in a civilized society. And that means your freedom to disagree, and your freedom to speak, and your freedom to move, and your freedom to transact. And I feel like, this is only going to be successful, unlike the Scottish referendum, if it's not just one political party, led. That actually the people that are right now voting with their feet coming in from California, I don't think that they're all politically the same as, some deep in the heart of Texas conservatives, but it should be a place that's good for them too. And that's the thing when it comes to the fairness, because that's what's happened, right? It's not capitalism, it's crony capitalism, right? These systems have been infected, and it's like, we need to reboot the system.
Yeah, I think you bring up some great points there, and especially with the Austin status quo and this notion of career politicians. It couldn't have been more clear watching, Speaker Dade Phelan, talk about, well, it was 80+% of Republican voters did not want to see Democratic chairs in this legislature. And for the Republican Speaker of the House to go totally against that, and also to change the day. By the way, they were going to vote on it because there were a lot of people heading to Austin to protest. So he had to vote the day before, and then, canceled it out on a technicality, which was also planned. It's pretty disgusting. Yep. And for those of you who don't know, the way it works is Dade Phelan, who's a Republican Speaker of the House, gets all the Democrats to vote for him as Speaker of the House, and in exchange for him giving them chair positions in these different committees, which Texas, which is a Republican, has a Republican governor, Republican Senate, Republican Congress, they're not able to get all of their Republican bills and stuff through because they've got Democrats chairing these different committees. So it's quite ridiculous. And so that is a definite problem. And, you talk about the reboot. I read a book a while back. Oh, actually it wasn't a book. It's a manifesto by a guy named Ted Kaczynski. You guys may
the Unabomber.
Yeah. Some of you may know him as the Unabomber. It's called Industrial Society and the Future. And other than, sending bombs in the mail, it'd be tough to find something you disagree with in that. And it talks about how at some point the system gets so big that it only allows things in that are good for the system. Yep. And at some point that revolution is actually easier than reform, because at some point you can't reform back to the place where you started or what was acceptable. And that's why a lot of times when we have, even, let's say for me, I'm a Republican, I would like, Republican things to get through. in a legislative session, they just don't, because it's not necessarily good for the system. The system being the career politicians and things like that have been in there, and it's got its own ideals and own agendas, and those agendas tend to follow the world, as we've seen. But the idea of a reboot, I think, is an awesome branding, for the Texas project. But yeah, it's tough to watch.
Oh yeah, it is so tough to watch. Well, we are planning on doing. We created a new channel called Preserving America in Texas. You can find the link in the description. If you don't mind, open up a new tab and subscribe to that. We cannot stream on that channel until we have a certain number of subs. Okay, so I'm going to encourage you, if you're watching this, if you do us a favor so that we can have that capability. I think it's 100 subscribers we have to have in order to be able to unlock, streaming on that channel. But the point of this is, there's going to be kind of some play-by-play and color commentary. This is really, honestly, I want to lift you up, Matt, in this way, because you've got your ear to the ground. I'm doing crypto stuff. We're focused on, all kinds of things across the world and tokenizing communities. But I feel like, what can we do that is, there's only so many things that the TNM can do, because they're kind of locked into, the process. And I feel like we need individual voices like yours and mine speaking up about these things, because, there's not really this venue outside of meetups and those type of things where people can share their perspectives, but also kind of look at, what's happening in the world, if you will, and keeping people informed. And I think there's also some creative ideas that we could encourage people. I mentioned to you about the Austin Tea Party.
Yeah, I love that idea.
To the Boston Tea Party, and we'll share that with you on this channel, as well as what are the kind of things that individuals can do that actually can advance the ball. The number one thing is to sign the petition. And right now, I think the TNM has done an incredible job with this petition, because the rules have changed. It used to be that you had to have a certain number of printed, physical signatures, and now you can do them all digitally. And this is a huge break for the referendum, project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here, and I want you to see this. If you're somebody who's in Texas or knows somebody in Texas, you can go to tnm.me/petition. I believe you can go to supporttexit.com as well, and it goes to this page. But this is this is a strategy by the TNM to get onto the primary ballot. And so one of the things to remind people of is that a referendum is not binding. And what that enables is really, it's a political show of will, right? The people want this. They demand a vote on Texas independence. And so this effort by the TNM to actually put it on the ballots of both the Republican and the Democrat primaries, well, because there's not as many Democrats in Texas, there's fewer signatures needed for the Democratic primary than the Republican primary, but it's significant and it needs that kind of support. But if it was on the primary ballots, this builds the case, showing people, because we currently have the most recent poll. 66% of likely voters said that they would vote for Texas independence. That's well over the 50% plus one. And so that is the will of the people, in my opinion, if you've got 66%. But you have people like Dave Phelan, you made a really great point, that are just going to, they want to be this moderate person, and it's selfishness rather than representing the will of the people. And so I feel very, very strongly that what an independent Texas does is actually leads in the world, and leads, because I think what's going to happen is the U.S. is going to realize that they need Texas more than Texas needs the U.S. And I think what it does is it opens up a conversation that people have not taken seriously, right? They look at, secessionist people and they're like, oh, you're just a bunch of crazy people. What they don't realize is actually who is in this community. I think that, everybody wants to paint, Texas independence folks as kind of white supremacy. That's the go-to thing, is that, well, you're just racist if you want to be separate. No, what does it mean if you don't have a two-tiered, judicial system, right? What if it's, you get your way if you're rich, right, and connected. And you think about what a reboot of the system provides, not only the innovations of, technological innovations and financial innovations, but a return to the fundamental rule of law, the protection of what we know creates strong citizens, which is the family. And there's so much evidence, but no one is willing to speak it, and to have a place where good people can go. um I think when you stand on principle, you attract people of all different political persuasions.
Yes, absolutely. You think of the kind of the momentum that Robert Kennedy Jr.
Oh
is
yeah, perfect
experiencing right now,
example.
just because he's telling the truth, and yeah, he doesn't. We're not used to that. We're not used to politicians that tell the truth. We're not used to politicians that say sorry. I don't know
Yeah.
that I've ever seen one. But you bring up this notion of speaking up, and you and I spoke about this, about how God speaks things into existence, right?
Yep.
And it's almost like that's the creative process, is you have to
It
speak it
is.
first. And what we haven't done well for a long time is, while the mainstream media and all these alphabet soup entities across the world have been speaking, has been evil. They've been trying to deteriorate our culture, create this selfishness, and they've been speaking it. The mainstream media has been speaking it. They've been broadcasting it, and we have not done a good job of speaking against it. And so it's started to build, and so it's backed us into this corner that we now need to stand up and push back. And it starts with speaking it. And Texit is one of those things that I think pushes back against that movement. And you brought up the Austin Tea Party and all these fabulous ideas. It's one of the best marketing ideas I've ever heard of. In fact, when I was driving back from Gen Con, I was looking at the exit signs. I don't want to give away your idea, but I was just like,
No,
man,
no.
this would be phenomenal. And so yeah, Matt's idea was that we have this, not like the Boston Tea Party, but the Austin Tea Party, and everyone went around to the exit signs and put a T on there, so it'd say Texit instead of exit. And I was even thinking, like, some of these exit signs are kind of high. How do we equip people with the ability to do this? But it then it needs to be like this decentralized thing. So I've already had these ideas working, but one thing we should talk about is what the petition actually does. Like, if we were to get this, if people were to say yes, what would actually happen? Well, it just allows us to talk about it legislatively, essentially, and start to have a dialogue in the Texas House and Senate of, what does Texit look like? What are the next steps? And even there, based on Dade Phelan rejecting something that had an 80+% support by Republicans. Texit, 66% sounds amazing, but is it enough to get our legislators to talk about it? I'm not sure.
So, and that's why we likely have to change them. And one of the primary utilities of the Texan token is to say, if these things are cyclical, and the people of the Texas nationalist movement and people who are freedom and sovereignty loving people across the world are a part of this endowment token, well, what if it happens that a very similar kind of run happens for Texan token that happened for Hex? Well, I think about these people who put in, I remember Bally Brand saying, hey, Matt, $100 turned into $1 million. Well, what does it mean when the people of the Texas nationalist movement who have held have the kind of resources? Well, that's what funds candidates, because at the end of the day, money is what drives politics. And, you have good people, rather than us finding these just ambitious people who want to make a name for themselves and it's selfishly motivated. How do we tap people on the shoulder like you, Matt, and say, all right, if you were going to be a leader in Texas, how would you animate this? And one of the things that I know is clear is that you would want to lead, and you would want to rule, and you would want to, serve in the very nature and character of God. Meaning, you would want to, you would take it seriously, and it wouldn't be just, your ambition. And that's one of the things that money and this unlocking of value within this, what the Texan token's real utility is to say, what if the people had the resources? How would politics change? And it really comes down to, imagine whether this next session or the following session, that we actually tap really good, honest, caring, God-fearing people on the shoulder and say, would you please, serve the people? Kind of like it seemed like in the olden days, right? That, hey, this was somebody that was respected in the community, and we're asking you to come and serve for a period of time. And returning to that, what I love about Texas is that the session is, once every 2 years, which is really helpful, and a balanced budget. And, there are good things about the structure of Texas, not to mention all of its natural beauty and resources. But it's like the greatest building blocks are there, the culture is there, the resources are there, and the people are there. But the problem is it's become such clown world that no one that I consider to have, respect for would have any interest in getting into politics, because it's become this, wood chipper of your family. I mean, it's a real risk these days. And that's the threat that keeps good people out of politics.
Well, I think it's a twofold education issue. One, people need to be educated on the fact that Texas could actually work. The fact that Texas currently is the 9th largest economy in the world. If we stopped overpaying the federal government, we'd be like the 6th largest. We'd be larger than Russia and Canada, Yeah. And we have our own port. We have our own electrical grid. We have our own army. Like we are set up to be the example for how this could go. We have so many things already in place. I think about you were mentioning about what happens when these people holding Texan token, who are passionate about Texas independence, if they get a 10,000X like the Hex community. You think like the Hex community is a bunch of, it's people from all walks of life, right? Yeah. I mean, I've met people across the entire spectrum, and the Hex community builds, man. They help people. A lot of people think of Hex and Richard Hart. He really just kind of had the idea, hired the developers, got it done. Everything else is created decentralized, independent.
Grassroots, man. Yep.
Grassroots. And then you want to talk about a grassroots community is the Texas nationalist movement. And people that, unlike similar to Hex, they would have, one thing that they all stand on, except that the people in the Texas nationalist movement have way more than one thing that they all agree on. Right. Yeah. I mean, Texas is a way of life. And I do believe that in 1836, when Texas won its independence, if you read the Bible, that the nations are things that God creates, and He puts people in charge of them. And so I do believe that God created that nation. It's no other way that a state of 30,000 people could have won their independence from a nation of 9 million. And some of the stories that I told you at Gen Con are just phenomenal, the way the Texans won their independence and how that was not a very likely thing. And so I do believe that God put that in place, and I'm not so sure that God wanted it to go away. And that's why the spirit of Texas has remained to this day. It's a special place that you sense the spirit and the pride when you come here. And I think that's something that is, it's unique, and it's unique because God's behind it. And so I was very disappointed that the Texit bill did not come to the floor, because I wanted to go up there and meet you and do my testimony. And and one of the things I was going to say is like, look, this is God ordained. Like, we just need to step out of the way and acknowledge it legislatively. Like, let's do it the easy way, right? Let's partner with God at the beginning and not,
amen.
Whoops.
Yeah. Well, that's so cool. So let's transition. You mentioned the Austin Tea Party. I just want to share that, and I want to also challenge you with one thing, because I'm somebody who, excuse me, is interested in out of the box thinking, right? Doing things that are in some ways extremely clever, but also, creative and, stick in your mind. And I want to share with you a couple things, but the first one is, I literally was driving to the office, and I literally saw every exit sign, and it had a T on it. Like, I literally was like, hold on a second. And I could not believe how many words exit. on every single exit off the highway. On every mile marker, it had exit on it. And so literally it was this weird kind of experience. And then this whole idea of, well, no, it's not the Boston Tea Party, it's the Austin Tea Party. Well, take a look at this. This is what was in my mind, is that you have these exit signs. And the reason that, you can't do these things as you can't do these things as an organization, right? The TNM can't do this because these are kind of things where, you creating, or, this is vandalism, right? If
Right.
somebody was to put a sticker on a sign, but that's why it can't be anything that's coordinated centrally. But this idea that, hold on, I see this every single day, right? This exit. Well, what is, people are using such traditional means to think of, let's do billboards, or let's do direct mail, or let's do this thing, this idea that you imagine every single exit sign in Texas had a T on it. And those were not created. People produce their own, right? They don't buy them from somewhere. But it's ideas like that where you're just like, you know what kind of power do you have as an individual? I was driving across the bridge across I-35 this weekend, and it's a real quiet town where I live. And you can just stand there on the side and all the traffic's passing by. And I remember, so many times where people literally had a sign right there. And, what are the things and how can we empower, and what are the movements? And so I don't know what stimulates those things, but I just recognize the TNM cannot be doing guerrilla marketing, right? Because these kind of things have to be spontaneous from individuals. And how do you make it easy? And so that was just what came to mind. And then, of course, the Boston Tea Party versus the Austin Tea Party. It was like, yep, if there was one on every single sign going in, I mean, it would be powerful.
Yeah, I think it's going to be TNon probably.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm going to throw out one other just idea, and I'm going to challenge you with this one. I've often thought, we've seen this, Abraham Lincoln ran for office many times and lost, right? Mm-hmm. And then you see these people, they know they're not going to win the presidency, right? Yeah. Every year there's a libertarian presidential, there's a Green Party presidential candidate. And then you've got some people who get into the race because I think what they're doing is they realize that this is exposure for them. And, you lose in the primary and somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, Matt, come on over here and help me out. And this is an out of the box thing, and I've never told you about this, so this is fresh for you. I think if you were a guy that a group of people came around, and I see you as this person, and they said, we want to finance your candidacy for the president of the Republic of Texas. Okay, so follow this logic. Okay, what do you mean there is no Republic of Texas? Fair enough. Okay. But here's the thing. Look at Mr. Beast. Why do people watch Mr. Beast? Why do people watch Dude Perfect, right? The two biggest channels in the entire world, because they're doing something that is unusual. And what really drives virality is somebody who is literally doing something that most people would not do or haven't done. And so you see these really bizarre, things, and it attracts your attention. And, it got me thinking, what would it look like with the press if there was a guy named Matt Long who was running for president of the Republic of Texas when there is not a Republic of Texas? And he's got a bus and it's got all the stuff, and he does campaign stops and talks to people all over the place. It's somebody stepping out, and it doesn't have to be you, but I'm just using you as an example, is that the conversation gets changed because you're serious. I mean, remember Beto and his truck and his, he's riding around on his skateboard. That's the essence of this, is that there's not a vote for the president of the Republic of Texas, but who is this crazy guy who is running this campaign? It's awareness, right? This is about saying, no, this is why it matters. And, I look at Robert Kennedy, F. Kennedy Jr., right? I look at him. Is he going to win? I guess there's a chance he could win, but he's bringing something to a national spotlight that no one's talking about. And you have to, it's like having handles on something. You have to have something to grab a hold of. That's why people write books. They're like, this is Matt Long. He's the author of the book X. Well, it's a calling card that gets you in the door. So what are the things that could be done? And to me, it's one thing if the TNM does a tour, right? They are a 501c4 civic organization. They can't say the things that Matt Long can say. Mm-hmm. And the question is somebody out there standing on principle and really, truly speaking the truth about what it means to be a Texan, what it means to preserve America in Texas, what it means? Is there anyone of skill, ability, capability, and principle who's willing to step out and do that? And I feel like that's the kind of thing. It's not that thing, but that's the kind of thing that needs to be done. They need to see people out speaking this stuff in a way that is bold. And, what has it been said? I forget who the quote is. People might not care about your politics, but if you set yourself on fire, they'll come and watch you burn. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially this concept. Look at this guy setting himself on fire. Well, we'll come and watch him burn. Well, why? Why is this so important? Why would you sacrifice your time with your family? Why would you do something like this to step out when we know that there's not a vote for the president of the Republic of Texas? Because these things have to be in the public conversation. And right now, the organization within the TNM can't do that. They can't talk about the family. They can't talk about, they could, but it's not wise for them to do that. So who is? Right? Are you somebody that could, and it's those kind of things that I feel like we've got to, those are the things that we're going to do on this podcast. And so when you subscribe to Preserving American Texas, is really talking about what are the things that we could do? What are those out of the box ideas? What are the things that we can support that bring a level of attention to this conversation that is, that needs to be had? And those happen between people at different meetups, but we need a new and an additional mechanism of people to be empowered, and we need to lead, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that, Matt? I've just made you the president of the Republic.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think you're definitely onto something with the type of marketing that needs to be done in order to bring something like this to the forefront, because the media is not going to talk about it unless it's exploding. It's going to have to be grassroots, and part of getting something grassroots is kind of give it a little bit of a different feel, and you talk about these candidates that run and lose, and I think there is some of them, it's a little bit of that selfish of like, exposure, get yourself out there, and you're using other people's money to do it.
Yep.
But then also you have people that maybe they know they're not going to lose, but they're far right or far left, and they know they're going to push the conversation at least their direction.
Ross Perot, remember him?
Yes, totally. Absolutely. And so, it's politics. Sometimes it's dirty, and sometimes you gotta do what it takes to get your message out there. And in my opinion, this could be a think tank basically for how we do this, and how we get active and how we get creative with marketing. And it's really interesting.
What I love about what you said earlier, you said, when things are God ordained, you have to kind of get out of the way. And I was talking to Steve Staggs right before we got on this stream, and we were talking about another topic, but he said, hey, you remember the story about the Ark of the Covenant? And I was like, yeah. He says, there was a provision for the Israelites to carry the Ark, and they had these golden rings, and they put these wooden, rods through them to carry it, right? And he made a really, really good point that I think is really appropriate here, is he said, people understood at that time that the power of God resided in this box, right? Like this is where, they put it in the tabernacle. It was in the Holy of Holies, that this was the power of God, right? And one of the things we see an account of in the scriptures is that when someone slipped and touched it, they were killed, right? They died. If they introduced death to it by putting a hand on it. And Steve said this. He said, you know what we don't realize is that if we truly believe that this whole creation was made for him and by him, right? And that we are a part of that, that really this relationship with God is really one of partnership, that he didn't need the people to carry the ark. This is the means by which, the mechanism by which we partnered with him. But those that carry the ark, imagine, well, we've gone around these walls 6 times. What do we have to do? Well, one more and blow the horns. And you go, that wasn't their power that brought those walls down. It wasn't their power. It was understanding their role in partnership with the one who had the power. And you said earlier, when something is ordained by that, you get out of the way. You let him do this work. And I think that that's one thing that so many people actually understand and believe, but there's no one who's willing to stand up and say it in leadership. Because if you think about this idea of, well, what if Matt Long was running Texas? Well, I would stand to bet, and I would want to encourage you to lead in the very nature and character to bless and protect the people of Texas according to, the authority given to you by God himself. And you would animate Texas for the purposes of blessing and protecting, because you were created in the image of God, and you would animate it for good. And certainly there are challenges and there are missteps, but that's at the core. I don't see those kind of principled leaders. People are lukewarm at best.
Yeah, no, you mentioned, getting out of God's way, and something that Steve said at Gen Con was, it's not necessarily that God gave you a vision, but he gave you his vision, yes. Right? He allowed you to see what he has planned for you in his life. And one of the things that I've kind of realized as you get older is, man, and something that Steve was talking about, I think on your last stream, was being able to relate to God in the present, yes. Right?
Yeah.
And how you, at least for me, I can get busy focusing on the future and what needs to happen, when in reality, God just wants me to take one more step today, one more step towards it today, and try to figure out what that is.
Yep. Well, and you think about it, give us this day our daily bread. No, it's not our weekly bread. And when they collected the manna, they tried to store it up, and it didn't last overnight.
Yeah,
unless it was the Sabbath. And it's like, how
amen.
Crazy. It's a partnership. And I think that, one of the things I've committed to long ago is to order my life on the very framework of creation.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we order our government on the very framework of creation? What is that? It's abundant. So what do people do? In their selfish ambition and desire for consolidation of power, they lord it over people. Well, why do you think we got away from King George? Right? Why do you think that we got away from that? Because the human spirit, right, that is created in the image of God is ordered, and we know in our hearts that it is aligned with the very nature of creation and abundance. But when it's scarce and when people lord it over you, it's inherently wrong. And that's why I think the founders were brilliant in saying we find these things to be self-evident. They're obvious. These things are inalienable rights given to you by a creator, not by government. And I think so many people think that their rights come from the state, that they're given these, the governor gave me this. No. These things you have inherently. We actually formed this government to serve us. It's time to reboot the system.
Yeah, that's where you get into the study of, the straw man and, the sovereigns and things like that. But it goes all the way back to Genesis 1:26, where God says, man, you have dominion over all these things. And he names, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea. And one thing he doesn't say is other men.
Yeah.
He gives you dominion over everything, just not other men.
Yep.
And a lot of people would say, in common law, that your rights or your freedoms stop when they start infringing on the freedoms of others.
Yep.
And that's what we need to get back to. The fact that God created us, we created government, right?
Yep.
And so government does not have sovereign rule over us. We have it over government. Now it appears as though we have gotten ourselves into contracts and things where we've actually given that up as a people group.
Well, and there's some really smart people who don't understand that. And, Daniel Miller talks all the time about the Texas Constitution in Article 1, Section 2 says all political power is inherent in the people. And there comes a time when you have to abolish or change those things, but it's reserved that right because government is based on the consent of the governed. We have created this for, our life, liberty, happiness, all of those things. And my son, it's so funny. My son's 12 and he'll ask me, he's like, I think he said, "Hey, is that the jail?" We were driving past we live or at my office in the county seat. And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "What's goes on in the jail?" I said, "Well, when you're disobeying and you're doing things you shouldn't be doing. And remember when you're little and we put you in timeout?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah." I said, "You know what's interesting is that there are people that kind of get out of control. They make some decisions and do some things, and they essentially infringe on the rights of other people, right? They keep them, they're not safe for themselves or for others. And you know what? Sometimes they got to spend a night in jail and sober up and get into timeout. And we have these mechanisms that we create this structure so that we can have a civilized society. And to see the very foundation of that being eroded, and feeling helpless. I think a lot of people are like, well, what can we do? And that's where all of this thing coming together, the financial power being separated from political power, the fact that we've got decentralized finance and people have the ability potentially, if they can come together in agreement, can literally change the very nature of their circumstances. But the power is in the agreement in community. It's not, well, I'm just going to yell at or take up arms. It's not that. It's actually, just what fiat currency is. It's by decree. We decree it because we have the authority to create government. And
I think, the only thing I was going to add is it may not require violence, but it may require you being passionate about it, to be willing to die, to not lose your rights. And that's what a lot of the very first battle, the Battle of Gonzales and Texas Revolution, was. They didn't have to kill anybody, but they said, without force, we will not yield. We feel like we're doing what is right.
Well, I was reading, something came across my feed on Twitter yesterday that was about the founders, or those that signed the Declaration of Independence. And it was recounting how a large majority of those people were singled out, right? Those that were loyalists to the crown, and they were destroyed, right? Their lives were destroyed. And for signing, their sacred honor to this document, that got torn up, right? And we celebrated yesterday, was something that literally many of those signers literally, died destitute because of, retaliation for standing up against this. And I think we think of it was this, well, we just fought the war and it was over.
Right.
No, this was very messy, to your point.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it last night as I was looking over the horizon, and I could see different fireworks shows going on, and how, there's a difference between celebrating July 4th and actually celebrating our freedom and independence and appreciating that, and how the way that these fireworks were exploding on the horizon could represent all, the bombs and guns and bullets that were shot and fired, and people losing their lives. And and to think about, what if that was happening right now? What if you were hearing those gunshots and those cannon shots getting closer and closer? It reminds me of the movie The Patriot, about how the war just got closer and closer to his house until he finally, he had to be a part of it. And yeah, I mean, it's a really good reminder every year for people to go out, shoot those fireworks off, and shoot them off for the reason of remembering all the brave men, not just fought, but like you said, literally ruined their lives, their worldly lives, for standing up for something that they believed in.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a unique time. And one of the things I think is so exciting about where the financial world and the political world come together in decentralized finance is, what if the people of the Texas Nationalist Movement and freedom-loving people across the world did have this kind of unusual experience with Texan token, for example? Well, so many people say, well, I'll be generous when I have a lot of money, right? Well, are we living our lives this way in a bear market, thinking about what is it that I can do to serve others? And, this is the thing that we want to obviously talk about in this new channel, which is preserving America in Texas, is that the American idea is really rooted fundamentally in the recognition of your inalienable rights that are given to you by a creator. And that very core idea of saying, no, we need to advocate and defend every person, regardless of their perspective. And that's the thing that I feel like is, the big message here. This isn't just for people who believe the same things politically as Matt Long, right? It's not. It's actually the system itself should be fair across the board. And that's the thing that I keep seeing. I look at Hunter Biden and his laptop, I look at all of these things, and it's easy to get polarized from a political perspective on one end of the spectrum or another. But at the end of the day, do you know how many people, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their politics, because of the nature of the system, don't have fair treatment? And who's going to stand for that? Because at the very, very core of government is, what is a civilized society, right? That there is, if you do not have the law, right? If you do not have the ability to have blind justice and equality, you don't have anything. And that's the thing that I look at is really the last firewall. Because I'm not convinced that if you're somebody that doesn't have the financial means or the right connections, that you will get treated fairly, at least in the federal court system. And, the way that things are weaponized with the FBI or CIA or all these folks that are, basically politically motivated, we know that what's good for people in a suburb of Chicago is not the same thing as Dallas, Texas. Solving problems locally, Republican, Democrat, and liberal versus conservative doesn't happen generally in the mayor's office, right? When you're in local, you're concerned about local things. And that's why I'm a big fan of how do we decentralize this? And, one of those things is Texas independence, right? There's a lot, it's hard to take orders from far away, especially when Washington is trying to give that to Davos or to the World Economic Forum or the WHO, which is one of the most current things of giving our ability in our sovereignty away to a non-elected global organization that is, we're going to tell you about lockdowns and we're going to dictate this globally. So anyway,
what could go wrong?
What could go wrong? What could go wrong? But folks, if you would, we'll get into the chat here. Say hello to you. If you would subscribe to the channel, there's a link in the description. There's some limitations on live streaming, so we can do this podcast. We need to have 100 subscribers. So if you don't mind sharing that out with some friends, asking them to subscribe so that we have the ability to do that, it's going to then be in podcast format as well as live stream. And so we don't even have the custom URL yet, right? This is it. It's like a -FO2BJ. And so, so if you don't mind, subscribing to that channel, that'd be helpful. Well, we're going to do that weekly on Wednesdays at noon, preserving American Texas. And you're going to be bringing some news for us each time. And then, I hope that we actually have some guests who will come on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to, like you said, we're going to speak about stuff that's happening. We're going to get active. We're going to give people some ideas on how to get this moving.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so folks, thanks for coming into this stream. Tim Harris has many, many good comments. Thanks for being here. Giving into microaggressions. Yeah, this is the thing. It's incrementalism, right? I mentioned to you a number of times, Matt, about the right after the war, there was the War Department actually put out a film that was really well produced. It's in black and white. It was made in 1947 called "Don't Be a Sucker." And I may actually pull some clips of that for one of our shows. If you get a chance, it's 17 minutes long. You can put it on 1.5 and get through it pretty quickly. But it's warning of what were the precursors to Nazi Germany. And when you see that film, it reminds you of exactly what's happening right now. It's crazy how similar it is. So, Tim, thanks so much for being in here. David Lee, absolutely. Hexy Quinn, thanks for your support. And, of course, TexHex. You met TexHex at the Gen Con conference. Great to see you here. Thanks for being here. Mr. T-Moss here. Hex Sirens here. Thank you guys for coming in and supporting this. Please, I encourage you to share and encourage others to subscribe. We need 100 subscribers to be able to live stream. What are kind of your final thoughts, Matt? And what do you hope for this new channel and new podcast of Preserving America in Texas?
I hope for a community of folks that are looking for an opportunity to contribute into the next generation of government. And I think that's literally what we're talking about creating here, of like government 2.0, right?
Yep.
And based on preserving, like you said, America, not necessarily America, the land, but America, the ideals.
Yep.
The idea of sovereignty for man, to get out from underneath the thumb of the kings and queens and the elites. And that's what we're here trying to provide. I think there's so much potential for prosperity in the land of Texas, especially as we're going into this digital future.
Yep.
And as you mentioned, the natural resources of Texas, and we've got some ideas on how that could literally become an enormous part on Texas leading the way. So yeah, I'm excited for what's to come. I want people to hop on board, even if you're not from Texas, help us out, and we'll figure out how to get you here as fast as we can.
Yeah. And you know what? Yeah, exactly. Well, and where do good people go?
Right.
And that's something that, what I liked about what you said previously too, is this idea of speaking it into existence. We're doing something that we can do, right? We're going to start this channel and speak about this. But
what if we could get more votes for the president of the Republic of Texas than some of the candidates, running for governor?
Oh, there's no question, right? That could be done.
Mm-hmm.
And it's stuff like that we want to, stimulate that discussion. But also there's this, there's something really fundamental about speaking it into existence, is saying it, that there are people that aren't crazy loon birds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Matt, I have a lot of respect for you. You're disciplined, you're well-spoken, and you're not somebody who's just trying to, hey, how can I, use my political science degree and make my business or my career in life politics. No, we see a need for good people to stand up and lead. And we lead by speaking these things. And so we're going to do that, whether people join us or not. Right, Matt?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. We feel called to do it. So
yeah, absolutely. And so to think that the money is changing, I even look at Richard Hart and freedom of speech, freedom of movement, having our own layer 1 blockchain, being able to build and to have a future that's decentralized where people are empowered. Well, what if those things were ordered by the very nature of creation, and that literally our government, was returned to that? Because that's really that idea of America, is this idea of freedom and a shining city on a hill. And so to see these things integrate, to me, is really the ultimate utility in the blockchain, because these things aren't meant to be separate. So Matt Long, it's always good to see you. Thanks so much. I look forward to next week and us getting together for Preserving America in Texas. Please subscribe to that channel. And thank you very much for coming on today.
My pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Matt. All right, folks, there you go. It's an official launch. Matt Long bringing the leadership. And I have a lot of respect for Matt. He is a superstar, in my opinion, and is going to be a significant player in the future of Texas politics. I really do. And when you meet somebody like that and you're like, oh, this guy's special. And so let's all do what we can do. And I'm excited about this next bull run in crypto, because this is going to empower so many people within the Texas nationalist movement. And if you're somebody who's in the TNM and you don't understand about the Texan token, you don't understand the stuff, get yourself educated. This is yours. We gave this gift and launched this out for this community to tokenize this community. This is yours to run with. There's no centralized organization. There's no marketing department. You can't rely on me and Rags to do it. I mean, goodness, a ginger giant? Come on. But thanks for joining today. I appreciate you, and take care of yourself, and do not mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.